Okay, so listeners out there in the field, anyone tackling Clausewitz right now, we're diving into some pretty heavy stuff today, chapters 13 and 14, maneuvering and terrain, and trust me, even for those of you who've been around the block a few times, this stuff can make your head spin. But that's why we're here, right, to break it down together and hopefully have some of those aha moments along the way.
That's right. We'll unpack Clausewitz's big ideas, but even more important, we're going to see how those ideas actually play out on today's battlefields because it's not just ancient history.
Exactly. Because let's be real, sometimes cracking open Clausewitz can feel like you're dusting off an artifact, right? But I promise you, this is about way more than just old battle tactics.
Absolutely. Take maneuvering, for instance. Clausewitz says it's about capitalizing on opportunity, even creating it from a standstill. He compares it to chess, not checkers. So we're not just talking about moving troops around, it's about that strategic outmaneuvering.
Okay, that makes sense on like a 19th century battlefield with armies lined up and all that. But how does that translate to modern warfare? I mean, with cyber warfare, drone strikes, everything moving so fast.
That's where it gets really interesting. Think about it this way. In Clausewitz's time, securing a key mountain pass could be decisive, right? Now, think about securing a vital network hub in a cyber attack. The principle is the same, controlling the critical point, but the playing field is totally different. You're maneuvering through networks now, exploiting vulnerabilities, trying to predict your opponent's next move in the digital space. It's maneuvering in the digital age.
So instead of controlling physical terrain, it's about controlling the flow of information.
Precisely. And just like in those battles Clausewitz describes, identifying and securing those key strategic points, whether it's a supply route then or a communication hub now, it can make or break a campaign.
And Clausewitz really digs deep into all of that surrounding versus interior lines, the whole balance between concentrating your forces versus spreading them out. He even uses examples like Frederick the Great and Montecuculus. And I gotta admit, sometimes I get lost in those historical details. So do those specific examples actually still hold up today?
They absolutely do, but let's bridge that gap to the modern world. Imagine, for example, a special forces unit operating in a dense urban environment. They're using those interior lines that Clausewitz talks about, not by holding a physical line on a map, but by maintaining their communication channels, staying connected amidst all the chaos so they can adapt quickly and outmaneuver the enemy, even when they're outnumbered.
It's like they're creating their own maneuvering space within that urban landscape.
Yeah, exactly. It's taking those core principles of maneuver from Clausewitz and applying them to these new complex battlefields. I mean, Clausewitz couldn't have imagined drone swarms, right? But you can think of those drones as extensions of his concept of concentrated forces able to strike swiftly and decisively at those key points. The technology has changed, for sure, but that strategic thinking, still strikingly relevant.
So we've gone from moving troops on open battlefields to navigating digital spaces. It's amazing to see how those Clausewitzian principles can be adapted. But then there's the whole terrain thing. Clausewitz talks about swamps, floods, forests. He even calls winter the natural enemy. It's hard to imagine those things mattering as much in modern warfare, though, right?
You might be surprised. Sure, technology has given us ways to deal with those challenges, like we can build bridges, airlift troops over mountains, even fight in some pretty nasty weather. But terrain still matters, just in different ways.
Okay, I'm all ears.
Mhm.
Give me an example.
Think about how Clausewitz describes the Dutch using their system of inundations, intentionally flooding areas, to stop the French army back in 1672. Now, fast forward to today. Imagine a force using cyber warfare to mess with weather prediction models, creating confusion and disrupting enemy movements. It's like a digital inundation, leveraging terrain in a completely new way.
Whoa, that's crazy. So it's not just about overcoming natural obstacles anymore. It's about understanding how they can still be used, even in the digital realm.
Exactly. And let's not forget the challenges that some environments still pose. Dense jungles can still mess with drone signals. Urban environments can limit air support and create unexpected lines of fire. Even something like a really intense heat wave can cause problems for sophisticated equipment. Terrain can still throw a wrench in the gears even with all the technology we have.
So we might not have to worry about our cavalry getting stuck in a swamp these days,
Yeah.
but those Clausewitzian concerns haven't disappeared. They've just evolved, right?
Exactly. And that's why his concept of the point of extreme nicety is still so relevant. Remember how he talks about that seemingly insignificant waterway that was left unguarded in the Dutch example? Well, today, that point of extreme nicety might be a gap in satellite coverage, a backdoor vulnerability in a computer network, or even a miscalculation of enemy morale based on bad intel.
So even in a world with constant communication and technology, overlooking those small details can still have massive consequences.
Absolutely. And here's another thing Clausewitz brings up that makes you think his focus on winter as the natural enemy. He argues that it slows everything down, disrupts supplies, and just makes everyone miserable. Now, with climate change causing more extreme and unpredictable weather, is that idea even more relevant today?
It's interesting to think about. On one hand, we're seeing more heat waves, droughts, and storms, all of which can disrupt military operations and even create humanitarian crises that the military might get pulled into.
Exactly. And then on the other hand, you've got militaries developing new technologies and strategies specifically to deal with these changing environments, like climate-resistant equipment or using renewable energy sources for forward operating bases.
It's like we're playing chess, but the board is constantly changing.
Exactly. And that's really what makes Clausewitz so brilliant, you know? He gives us this framework for dealing with that uncertainty. He gives us the tools to analyze how technology, the environment, and even just human behavior all interact on a battlefield.
So it's not about memorizing specific tactics from a book. It's more about really absorbing that Clausewitzian way of thinking,
Mm.
that ability to adapt and think strategically no matter what gets thrown at you.
Exactly. And remember how he talks about the importance of understanding the enemy's center of gravity, that thing that their whole war effort depends on.
Right, like in his time, it might have been a capital city or a strong leader.
Exactly. But today, that center of gravity could be something totally different. Think about it. Their access to global financial networks, control of essential infrastructure, or even just the story they're telling the world, those could all be critical points.
So how do we take those Clausewitzian ideas and apply them to those modern centers of gravity?
It takes a real shift in perspective. Think about how cyber attacks can cripple a country's economy or turn people against each other, or how controlling the information people see in the media can shape global perceptions and alliances. These are the new battlefields where Clausewitz's principles of maneuver and disruption take on a whole new meaning.
It's almost like he saw this coming, this fusion of physical and informational warfare, even without knowing the technologies that would make it possible.
That's a good point. He understood that at its core, war is about willpower. It's a battle of psychology and perception just as much as it is a battle of armies. And that is a timeless insight.
This has been eye-opening. But before we wrap up, I have to ask, if Clausewitz were here with us today, what would he say about things like drone warfare, artificial intelligence, the increasing automation of conflict? It's kind of mind-blowing to even try to imagine.
It really is. I think he'd have a lot to say about the ethical questions raised by these new technologies, like the potential for things to go wrong in ways we haven't even thought of, or how the lines are blurring between soldiers and civilians. But I also think he'd remind us that human judgment still matters. Understanding what technology can't do, and never forgetting the bigger political goals behind any conflict.
So even in a world where technology is advancing faster than ever, that human element remains absolutely crucial.
Absolutely. And that's why Clausewitz is still so relevant. Not because he has all the answers, but because he teaches us how to ask the right questions.
Well said. And as always, we want to leave you with something to think about. So here's a final thought. If you had to brief Clausewitz himself on the complexities of modern warfare, what 3 key insights would you share with him to bring him up to speed? Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep those strategic minds sharp.